Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, December 5th, 2017, 3 o'clock at Vets Hall. This is the regular December 2017 meeting of the WRF Citizens Advisory Committee. Would like to welcome everybody. I see we have a quorum and a call to order. The chairperson is tied up in a county board supervisors meeting. He may come in late. So as vice chair, myself, Barbara Spagnola, I am presiding until he arrives, if he arrives. So just that's an FYI. So I'd like to welcome everybody, welcome our staff. We haven't met since July of 2017, so we have some new city staff personnel. The new city manager, Scott Collins, on board about a month now, correct? Welcome. And Cherie? No, I'm sorry. Janine. Okay. Janine, your last... Oh, okay. Oh, I know you by your email, right? Berlin. Yeah, okay. Welcome. Thank you. You look a little bit like Cherie, so sorry. And then our newest member, Ann Fullerton. Okay, welcome, everybody. So, are there any committee announcements before we begin? Okay, so then let's have a quick moment of silence and go ahead. And then rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'll open it up for public comment for any items not on the agenda or those which may be on the agenda for which you cannot stay. Anybody in the audience? Please come forward, state your name, and proceed.
Good afternoon, Barry Brannon, Morro Bay. I know we are talking about a water recycle facility, water treatment plant, and one of the basic parameters for any project is to determine what the scope of work is. So I've been reviewing some of the studies, and there was a study that was available, an offshore monitoring report that was done in 2008. It's light reading, 554 pages. But if you go through it, you'll find that there's some extremely interesting items that need to be considered with what we're doing. Number one, during the 10-year period prior to that report, the water usage in the city was constant, very little change. But one thing in the report that showed up that was very interesting was the fact that there was over 20% infiltration into the plant. And they go on and speculate on what happens. One of the interesting things was the fact that if you get 1 inch of rain, a rain event, you get 500,000 more gallons of water into the treatment plant from that 1 inch of rain. And they document this as you go along. So keep in mind, we have constant water usage for 10 years. We have 20% infiltration that they document. Then you jump ahead to the current reports. Your current report shows that for the last, from 2013 to 2017, the city's water consumption has gone down 20%. It's kind of interesting because that water consumption time ties in directly to the rate increase, the water rate increase. So my point is this. Los Osos made a huge mistake. They used some numbers that they had, and they missed it by 100%. Their plant over there now, where there's 97% of their people are hooked up, the plant was designed for 1 million gallons a day. They're getting 500,000 gallons a day. They're actually considering putting stormwater into the plant to keep the bugs alive. I want to make sure that the plant that we're going to put in, no matter where it is or what it is the right size. And I think it's time to take a real hard look at the base numbers that are used to project what we're doing. I don't think that you're reflecting the fact that the cost of water is going up, so therefore the volume of water is going to go down. I also don't see any big movement to reduce this infiltration. In this report that I cite you, they actually say it's more than 20%, and they go on and reasons why. So these are housekeeping things. Tighten up the water lines that you have. Design for what you need. Don't build a huge plant. And consider the fact that with 25% of our use gone away with Cayucas gone, we're really only going to need a plant about half as big as we think we need. And I'd like to have that re-looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Any other public comment at this time? All right, I'll close public comment. Staff, do you have any comments, Rob, on this, on Mr. Brannon's issue or concern? Are you familiar with that report he's referring to?
Yes.
Thank you.
In regards to water usage in the city, yes, water usage has come down in the city based on state water conservation goals, which have now been relaxed. Most of that water conservation was outdoor water use. I think we're at a point where it's going to be difficult to decrease the amount of indoor water use. The retrofits are pretty widespread in the city, toilet retrofits, washing machine retrofits. It's going to be difficult to be lower than we are. In fact, we've seen water usage starting to creep back up again now that the state has relaxed the conservation standards. I&I, inflow and intrusion into the system, stormwater getting into the system, yes. It's prevalent in basically all wastewater collection systems, except for probably the newest ones. And every wastewater collection system has a program for reduction of I&I, and we're no different from the rest of those. We have a portion of our capital improvement program goes to repairing main lines in the streets. We require, where most of the I&I occurs is the connection from the house to the sewer line. Upon remodel, we require homeowners to inspect that, and if it needs to be repaired, they repair that as part of their remodel. So yes, we do have an I&I reduction program. I'm not sure we'll ever get back to zero I&I because we have a system that developed from the early 50s or earlier till now, and unless we replace the entire system with some sort of tight jointed pipe, and we'll never eliminate I&I 100%. We can do our best to reduce it, and we do have a program to do that. Our One Water planning effort, which includes a wastewater master plan, is looking into that, making sure we're right-sized for that. So that'll be brought forward to our PWAB and council coming up this early next year. I believe the first meeting in January, we have a council meeting to talk about a little bit about that program. So that's what I have.
Okay.
I got a
Go ahead.
If I could ask a question, Rob. Isn't it fair to say Los Osos had no historical reads of what would come to their plant since they were all on septic? You're basing our plant, as I understand, on the historicals flowing to the plant right now at the headworks, correct?
Yeah, the historical flows minus Cayucas's contribution, which is metered.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I got a question for you, Rob. In a recent city council meeting, you mentioned that we have some unsavory constituents entering our drinking water aquifer. Can you give me a operational definition, what you mean by that?
I don't recall me saying unsavory constituents entering our drinking water aquifer.
Or in the Morro Basin aquifer? Okay, are you aware of the sewage that's exfiltrating into the Morro Basin aquifer? So, because if we're talking about I&I, we also have to talk about exfiltration.
We probably exfiltrate a little bit, but our view and the regional board's view is that nitrate contamination is coming from upstream agriculture.
The regional board actually said that they're not going, they didn't deny the fact that the sewage is entering our drinking water aquifer. They said that they're not going to address the issue. And my question is that if we have a have sewage exfiltrating into our drinking water aquifer, that is something that's going to affect our NPDES permit, isn't it? Because it eventually ends up in the ocean, right? So isn't that part of the project that you're going to have to address?
The problem line is the Main Street and Atascadero lines. Those are on our capital improvement program. We'll address those. In my view, it's the bigger issue is water coming into the pipes rather than exfiltration. I believe exfiltration is a minor component of that.
We have sucralose in our drinking water aquifer, and the reason why the regional board had asked us to do a sucralose test, the only reason why you would do it is to suspect sewage in your drinking water aquifer, which was proven. So having a sewage component in our drinking water aquifer and the I&I information that we have here, these are tied together. So I question the wisdom in marginalizing the exfiltration issue in our collection lines.
We also have sucralose in our state water supply, which is used for irrigation water.
Yeah, but it was less than what was found in the Morro Basin aquifer.
Yes.
So that proves that we have sewage entering our drinking water aquifer.
From a variety of sources, from upstream and perhaps
from collection lines, correct?
Perhaps. Not significant amounts.
Excuse me, so can we hold that discussion? I was just trying to respond to that, and I know it's somewhat related, but I want to get through the agenda.
Well, it's directly related. If you're going to talk about I&I, then we need to talk about exfiltration.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that brings us to the consent calendar. That would be item A1 on the minutes.
I believe there's a correction to a web address on there. EPA's
website
address was.
Right. Do you have that correction?
Inadvertently wrong. There's a space off in there, so it's.
Run it all together. The two spaces don't belong there. This is on the minutes from the previous meeting, and the last sentence of the first paragraph. The website for more information on grants and funding information is epa.gov/Water Finance Center, no spaces,
Correct.
no dashes. So if we just correct that, that would be good.
Yes.
So I would make a move that we add that correction to the minutes. From the minutes from July 5th, 2017. Is there a second on that motion, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Any other corrections or updates to the minutes, please? All right, thank you. We will move then to item B1.
And we have our new finance director, Jennifer Callaway, that's going to give us an overview and give us some highlights of things to come.
Thank you. Welcome, Jennifer Callaway, and please proceed.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. This quarterly report is a little overdue, but also came at the behest of the City Council. At the last meeting, they indicated that they were ready to receive a fourth quarter report, had been waiting for it. The hope was to be able to come before you today with that information, but had we not been able to prepare it in time, they still wanted it for the Tuesday council meeting. So the fourth quarter update that you have in front of you is the fourth quarter actuals. It's in the traditional format that you've seen in the prior quarters. And again, that was part of the council request. We've gone through and verified the expenditures for the fourth quarter, comfortable with what those were, and they were related. What you don't have before you today is the cash balances. That will be coming on Tuesday. As a prior auditor, you always go back and verify and make sure you're comfortable with information that's been presented in the past. So I'm doing that now. I couldn't complete it for today's meeting. Had a couple questions to send to prior staff, so waiting for for some clarity on them. So that will be reported at Tuesday's meeting, and that's the cash balances and updated projected. We haven't gotten audited statements yet, but unaudited projections at this point. The report is, I think, what you're used to seeing. We did have a series of about 6 questions that came in this afternoon. Rob is going to address most of those. There wasn't any real financial related questions. They were more surrounding the loan program. The one that did come up that's kind of finance related that I can speak to is the amount of money spent on Ferguson for government relations lobbying. It was $18,500, and that was monthly retainer fees. Rob can speak to specifically what they were working on, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. With a month on it, I might have to say I'll get back to you at the council meeting, but I do have some of the detail with me, and will do my best to answer questions you have.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions on the report as provided in here? I did review it in fair amount of detail as well, and I didn't find any, errors or anything. I will say that each month, sometimes it's off a little if you take the previous year to date and add this. Now, this time I see you added in 3 new line items, but it's never significant, and it appears to be journal timing entries, but.
It is, and actually that kind of leads into our piece of a conversation we wanted to have. Sandy is our budget and accounting manager, and she's with us today, and she actually set up going forward in fiscal year 17-18. This is a separate project, so she's created a project, very detailed line items of how we'll be recording the expenditures, so we can produce reports that are more detailed by vendor and consultant and type of services that were provided. So we're hoping to be able to adjust the format a little bit and bring back information that's more detailed and hopefully more useful for you as a committee to review.
Okay, and just for everybody's clarification, this is the 2016 to 2017 fiscal year report you're looking at. So Sandy's created a new one for the next fiscal year. So, so I'd like to open it up. Is there any public comment? Thank you, Jennifer.
My name is Homer Alexander. I have a couple of suggestions on ways to improve the financial reporting for wastewater treatment and the reclamation project. The first is timing. Mr. Nunley's firm already submits their invoices promptly. Since there are only 4 or 5 other firms that work on the project in any given quarter, it should not be difficult to encourage them to do the same. The Public Works Department and the finance staff could then have at least 3 weeks to review the invoices and to prepare the reports for your meetings. I don't believe there's any reason why the reports cannot be presented to your committee in the second meeting following the close of a quarter. In other words, you should have received this report at your August meeting. Today's staff report explains this quarter's delay. However, in my opinion, these reports have never been published in a very timely manner. Greater transparency in the numbers might give some in the community more confidence in the way this project is being managed. My second suggestion is to recommend to the city staff that beginning with the 2018-19 fiscal year, that a separate budget and financial reporting be established for water reclamation. I believe it is very important to start financially to separate wastewater treatment from water reclamation. The city attorney has pointed out that treatment and reclamation are 2 different projects. As you are all aware, each is funded separately, and even though they are billed on the same piece of paper. I know the city staff and the regulators think of this as one project, but accurately determining the capital costs and therefore the annual debt service that is allocated to wastewater treatment versus water reclamation is going to be extremely important if the sewer rate increase that is proposed for next spring is going to be successful. A place to begin the financial separation would be to recommend to the city's finance director that she transfer the $244,000 to the water fund that Frugro and GSI Water Solutions billed the city for studying the Morro Valley aquifer to determine if groundwater recharge was feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Homer. Any other public comment? Okay, close public comment. Thank you. I will turn it over to Rob to respond if you have any comments. Well, first of all, does the city have a copy of the last presenter, Alexander's comments? And would that be helpful? Okay, so Mr. Alexander, if you could leave a copy or email to us, that would really be appreciated.
Thank you. I think I got them down, but
it always helps.
This will help.
Yeah, very good. I want to make sure. I think there were some very valid points presented.
Yes.
I think this is very helpful. So we also had some questions from our Ginny Gorelick, and I'd like to make sure that those get addressed.
Maybe I could run through those.
Why don't you run through those now? Yeah,
quickly.
they're pretty much related to this, except for a couple.
The first question was regarding the expenditure of $18,017 for lobbying support. That was with the Ferguson Group. They provided outreach to USDA, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Congressman Carbajal's office, EPA, and really positioning us for grant and loan financing from the federal government is what they're tasked with. There was a question regarding print and advertising expenses, and the question is, could we include WRF topics on with the monthly water and sewer bills? And yes, we have definitely talked about that. That would get a item out there in front of everybody on a monthly basis with very little additional cost to do that.
Going back to that first Fugro, I'm going to read Ginny's question so people in the audience know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. The lobbyist support expenditures year to date are $18,017. What services has Ferguson Group provided other than lobbying for dredging in the Morro Bay Harbor? So what exactly have we gotten for $18,000?
Well, first of all, I forgot to mention they don't provide lobbying for dredging. Okay. That's a separate company.
Okay.
Exactly what they do, they are a lobbyist.
Okay.
They put our project in front of decision makers so that it is in their eyes. Okay. So they've met with USDA, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, EPA. They set up a meeting with Congressman Carbajal's office and his staff to come to the city. And they provide regular emails on what is going on in the federal government related to water, wastewater, and just general activities. Like we get a regular report on the tax bill because they're sending that out to other clients. We also get that information also. I'm going to go on with other items, and maybe I'll...
That's a reasonable expense, right?
Yes.
Based on all those meetings and that, and we know that the lobbying has to occur if we're going to get some help. So, okay, thank you. Thanks, Richard, for the clarification. Go ahead.
Their expenses are on a retainer basis. We pay $4,500 a month for retaining their services. And it's a contract the city signed with them last year. Talked about print advertising. The next item is regarding the SRF planning loan, wondering if that $10.3 million loan is still viable. Yes, it is still an active loan. We have not had to draw on that loan yet. We've been using funds in our accumulation to not draw on those funds and incur interest. So, but probably when we get into the design phase of the design build, we will incur expenses greater than our accumulation, and we will need to draw on those funds. That loan will roll into an SRF construction loan once the construction loan, if approved, with the state.
So we don't lose that loan if we're not using it. I think that was the basis
Yes,
of the question. Thank you.
We're keeping our project manager up to date where we are on the project, and let him know that we will be drawing upon that when needed for the design phase of the design build.
One of the things that you kind of skipped through is the printing at an advertising cost of $25,592. And Jenny kind of mentioned that a way to reduce that cost is to develop an in-house an in-house system. Are you working on that, or is that something that are we going to continue to pay? Because that's what basically she's asking.
Yeah.
She made a comment on the cost of printing is almost $26,000 for these flyers.
Most of that cost is in mailing, so the way to reduce that cost is not to mail those out to mailboxes. Should the city not want to distribute that information via separate mail, we can reduce that cost. We're looking at reducing the scope of complying with the requirements of the Postal Service for every door direct. So it's a postcard rather than a flyer that would get mailed out, and then also using the existing city water bills as a mail resource, because those get mailed out, although not everybody in town gets a water bill. There are some folks that pay electronically, and they don't get a paper water bill. So,
well, some of the issues that I've heard from the citizens is the fancy, heavy cardstock, color photos, and of all this stuff that the cost of actual, not the mailing, but the product that's being mailed.
The cost for color, regardless if you have a picture on it or colored text, is about the same. Really, the significant cost is the mail distribution of that item.
Okay.
And we might make some suggestions along those lines. I know CFAC has made suggestions in consonance with the budget-friendly documents to put some of these into the pie charts. This was provided to council in August, I believe, with a one-page frequently asked questions.
Yes.
So I think there's some other avenues to get some summary information out there that might not be as costly.
Yeah. So we take advantage of the city's website, posting information on there, and then directing people to that through our Facebook portal, and providing that information on Nextdoor also. It's difficult to hit everybody with everything without expenditure of funds for even with direct mail. Sometimes that gets just mixed in with the rest of the junk mail and may get recycled without being read. Speaking from experience, personal experience anyway.
Go ahead.
Property acquisition, what does the 30,500?
You kind of skipped one. It's has the
WIFA
city actually started to write an application?
Okay, yeah, sorry, thank you. Has the city actually started to write an application for the WIFIA loan from EPA? And if so, has the city encountered any stumbling blocks? The city is working to prepare the application and technical data, and we have coordinated closely with our EPA project manager for the WIFIA loan to obtain the requirements. So we have not actually started on the physical application yet. We're in the coordination with the EPA project manager and gathering the technical information required for that application. Actually, our one of the members of our consultant team, Kestrel Consulting, will be putting that application together for us.
Who's the EPA project manager on that?
Kevin McDonald. Property acquisition. What does the $30,500 expenditure reflect? Reflected, and this is on page 2 of the colored spreadsheet showing expenditures, and it's in a life-to-date section. $5,500 appraisal of the Rigetti property, and then $25,000 per our contract with the Rigetti property owner for an option to purchase, to take the property off the market.
Thank you.
Next question. I'm going to read the question statement first. SRF loan. Has the city been awarded $59,937,500 for SRF construction loan, or is this just an estimate? I was led to believe that SRF loans for future projects were uncertain. Has this situation changed? No, we have not been awarded a construction loan. This is an estimate, assumes low-interest financing, and will ultimately be adjusted to reflect the split between WIFIA and SRF.
Okay. So that estimate is just in the revenues line. I think that's what initiated that question, but that's...
It's not a true revenue
right,
yet.
Exactly.
It's an estimate.
So
Yes.
That's a good question. Thanks for that clarification. So I think, Rob, that concludes the questions on the budget report? Yes. And I think the only other one I had is you did add some new things. I see here we have a flow monitoring services, V&A being the consultant. I thought we had a pretty good handle on that, or is that something we still had to go out to another consultant for?
So we wanted to get a better assessment. The project includes significant costs for estimates for pumping, conveyance, and equalization at the existing facility. We want to confirm that things are right size. So they actually put flow monitoring equipment in the collection system to confirm those flows. They're still not complete yet. They're doing some data crunching. They also have calibrated our influent flow meter for us. We want to make sure, per Mr. Brannon's comments, that we are sizing the plant absolutely correctly. So that was an item that we identified that we really needed to do prior to looking further for a design build project.
How are you estimating your exfiltration rates with regards to the flow metering that you're doing within the collection system?
We're not estimating exfiltration rates.
At all?
It's, we have an influent flow meter. We know what's coming into the plant.
No, I'm talking about the collection system. There's pockets in the collection system that are actually surcharging per the data that we have from the city. For instance, a 60/40 line in the Main Street trunk line is already over capacity. How are you addressing the exfiltration rates from that line?
We believe that exfiltration rates are not a significant factor in sizing the facility.
Okay, thank you, Rob. All right, that brings us to item B2, the WRF status report. Once again, I'll open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, close public comment. Let's proceed to that item, the staff report.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
We have our project management team here to add in anything that we want to highlight, but I'm going to go through basically the what we've accomplished and the schedule for what we plan on doing. So we've met with representatives from both the county and LAFCO on the South Bay Boulevard site to set up the process for both potential annexation and permitting of the project. Also received input from the Coastal Commission. We've started the draft environmental impact report, including additional studies for traffic impacts and supplemental cultural resources investigation. We've initiated the lift station and pipeline design services with Waterworks Engineering. They'll be designing the conveyance system from the and the lift station from the existing site up to the new wharf location. We've received council direction to accelerate procurement proposals on the wharf on-site. So we've released an SOQ request, or released a RFQ soliciting SOQs, so an RFQ, request for qualifications, SOQ, statement of qualifications for prospective bidders on the project. So we're following the California Public Contracts Code for design build for cities, which requires a two-step process. So the first step is to pre-qualify potential bidders. Second step is to release a request for proposals that the shortlisted firms will propose on. We'll be seeing much of this discussed in the next item. We are working with Bureau of Reclamation on something called the crosswalk document that basically, excuse me, compares our existing water reclamation feasibility report to the report required by Bureau of Reclamation to be included in their Water Smart program. Water Smart program would be a significant asset to the city. It can fund up to 25% or $20 million of water recycling projects. We prepared the status report for State Water Resources Control Board regarding our planning loan. We have not, as stated earlier, we've not submitted any draws upon this loan. And we've resumed the development of performance criteria and request for proposal preparation of the design build wharf on-site improvements. Things that we can look forward to coming up. And right after the first of the year, we'll release the RFP for design construction of the wharf on-site facilities in January. Council will also review in January our program management for the project. We'll be preparing a analysis of our existing rates in February to look to see how much they could fund in capital on a project, and also look at recommendations to see what types of rate increases might be needed to fully fund this project. Release of the draft EIR will happen in March of next year. We anticipate needing an updated rate study that would be released in May, with a Prop 218 hearing occurring in June of 2018. Council would look to certify the final EIR in June also. Our deadline for the WIFIA application is June 17th of 2018. I like to report that date is, or excuse me, July 17th. I like to look at July 1 for the deadline. I don't want to go to the very last day that we have possible to submit. So one thing EPA does allow is early submittal of portions of the application that are ready to go, so we'll be working with Kevin on that to get that information into them as soon as it's available. Council would award a contract for WRF on-site improvements in August of next year, and award a construction contract for the lift station and off-site improvements in November of 2019. We're still looking at October of 2021 for completion, with startup and commissioning of the facility bringing us up through January of the following year, 2022. That completes my update. There's a detailed project schedule attached to this, and myself and the rest of the program management team would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Steve.
Rob, I just want to make clear in my mind, when you're throwing out the dates, you will have a hard construct, or at least a hard proposal from a design build team prior to going through the rate study or finalizing the rate study and going to the Prop 218 vote. Is that correct?
Yes, we're hoping to have several proposals, actually, with a guaranteed maximum price and a indication on life cycle costs.
Okay. It is still a competitive bid, though, correct?
It is a competitive bid process.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I got a question on the WRF Lift Station Pipeline Design Services Project by Waterworks. You mentioned that you had contacted the Coastal Commission. Do you have it in writing that the Coastal Commission is amiable to a lift station at or near the location of the current power plant or a current wastewater treatment plant?
No, I don't think we have anything in writing from them, but we've had discussions with them.
You have?
They realize that we have a collection system that terminates on the west side of the highway, and we have a proposed project on the east side of the highway several miles away, and short of the sewer cannon, we need to get the wastewater from one spot to the other.
Okay, because I had dialogue with a Coastal Commission planner that's on this project, Kevin Kahn, and according to him, he's not aware of any project, and he has actually advised you that you're going to have the same problems with the lift station as you did with the existing wastewater treatment plant. And I would like to ask maybe Nunley to come up and explain to me, for the public, how a lift station is going to be better serve as from a public health and safety standpoint than what we have there now.
Maybe Mike or John can address the discussions with Coastal and the issues with the lift station versus a full wastewater treatment plant at that location.
Yeah, just from a public health standpoint, I want to know how a lift station is going to be serve the public from a public health and safety standpoint better than what we have currently.
Sure, I'll have Mike answer that part, but I'll answer the Coastal Commission question. We've also had discussions involving Kevin Kahn, and our discussions with them and Dan Carl have indicated that they're aware of the lift station issue. They know what we're up against. So you may have had discussions, and they may have had a slightly different context, but from our perspective, Coastal staff is well aware of the situation, understands that wherever we put this, we have to get sewage down to a low point. So that's as far as I can eliminate that.
So have we got anything in writing from Coastal Commission before we start spending money on designing and building a lift station and a force main from Coastal that they are amiable to a lift station at the location there?
Not specifically on that, because remember, we're still dealing at the Coastal staff level, who advises the Coastal Commission itself. So what we're trying to do is work with them, and they're using their professional judgment, knowing what our project is, to be able to advise Coastal Commission. They have not said, nor can they say definitively, here's what Coastal Commission is going to do. They've given us clear advice and direction on this. We're following it.
Okay, and you're following it based on designing a lift station at that current location, correct? At the wastewater treatment plant?
They're aware of our project and where the lift station would be, so yeah.
Okay, so basically you can't get it in writing that they are in agreement with you moving forward with building a lift station there?
We can,
land
again,
use and everything?
we can talk to them about that. At this point, they're really in a position not to be able to convey what the Coastal Commission itself will vote on at the end of the day.
I realize that, but
Right.
at a staff level,
Right.
we
We can work with them and see what we can, find out more to provide more clarity for you. But it's been pretty clear for us in our discussion level.
Well, I think that before we start spending money for the public's sake, that they would have a warm, fuzzy feeling that the Coastal Commission is going to be amenable to building a lift station at that point. We should have that in writing. Otherwise, it's like we could be designing a lift station. It's kind of like what happened when we're doing the upgrade several years ago at the particular location in the flood zone there. And, we spent a lot of money for that upgrade, and then realizing that there was going to have to be some kind of a managed retreat or whatever. But the city has spent millions of dollars in that respect, and what I see is this going down the same road unless we get it in writing that they're gonna be amiable to it.
We appreciate the question. We'll look more into it.
Thanks, duly noted. Mike, if you can, so we can move on.
Sure, thank you. Regarding the health and safety question, it's a very good question. When you have a community that has a lot of residences, a lot of commercial area in the coast, in the floodplain, you have collection system pipes, and you have to be able to connect a lift station to those to pump that sewage out of the area. And the only other way around that is you relocate the entire community that's in the floodplain or tsunami inundation zone. The thing I would say is the benefit to having a lift station there, or the relative benefit to a lift station to a full treatment facility, is your ability in the event of a disaster to recover more quickly, and also your cost to recover more quickly, in that your wastewater, your water recycling is now all handled at a site that's not in the tsunami inundation zone, is not in the floodplain. The lift station is going to be designed to be above the for the elevation to be above the flood standards. The wet well itself is going to be designed where the pumps sit down in the bottom of the hole. That will all be designed to be flood resistant. But your disaster recovery in a case where the whole entire treatment system is not at that location is a much quicker process and much less expensive than if all your critical infrastructure was there. And Coastal Commission did, in the meetings we've had with them and the discussions, part of their support for the South Bay Boulevard site is they understand that pumping's required to get to South Bay Boulevard, and they wrote letters expressing support for these locations that are not adjacent to the existing plant site. So they understand that at a technical level. Until we've submitted our CDP application, John, then we can't expect to get really formal, if you will, review from staff or Coastal Commission. That really starts that process. But we've done enough investigation and discussion with them, received enough back and forth to have confidence that they recognize this is really the only way for the community to go if they relocate that plant.
Regarding the lift station logic that you say, have you ever worked in collections? Is that your expertise?
I've never been an operator, but I've been a design engineer.
First responder to collection emergency?
Never have.
Okay, I have. And the issue that I'm bringing up is when a lift station fails, okay, regardless of where your plant is, when that fails, okay, I'm a mechanical engineer, so if it's going to be mechanical, you have to design for a system failure, and then the results from that, what happens? Now, the logic that you're saying is that you're moving the facility away. However, if you don't get the sewage there because of a failure of a lift station, you end up with sewage on land. With a wastewater treatment plant, you end up using the outfall, and you can dump it off land. Dump it off of the land. So, and you have more detention time in a wastewater treatment plant. So the logic of putting in a lift station doesn't seem doesn't seem like there's logic there with regards to first responding and emergencies.
My point is it's a necessity. You have to have a lift station there if you have a treatment plant that's not going to be located at that spot.
I understand that. My question is that going in that direction, how is this from a public health standpoint? Because as a planning commissioner representative, we have a duty of care, which is different than when you're a consultant, but as a duty...
Well, actually, as a professional engineer, I have a duty of care that I am responsible for. It's supposed to be above all other interests and that sort of thing.
Well,
so I would argue with that.
Okay, with that duty of care, how is that going to benefit the community? Because I understand, you're making money designing these things. I'm talking about the logic behind it.
I'm not sure. Are we on
I'm not sure where
Well,
we have.
it has to do with the lift station. If we're going to be spending money designing a lift station, I want to know where the logic is.
I agree. I would also maybe defer this question till the end. I'd like to go through the agenda on our time, or we have another meeting coming in here, and we will run out. Right, and we have a presentation, so we haven't even gotten through the discussion up here, so I would like to do that and then, address these questions. So I think we were on Paul. You had some comments, please?
Yeah, real quick on the program schedule update that you just read, Rob. I'm looking back at the accelerated schedule that you presented to the City Council on October 10th, and a lot of those dates now that we have today have changed. For instance, your financial analysis was originally presented to the City Council to be done in December, but now you have it in February. Same thing with the release of your updated rate schedule. That was originally in April, now it's May. The 218 hearing was in May and it's now in June. Seems like a lot of things have slipped since the time the council was presented your accelerated schedule. Do they know of it, and do we know why this has happened?
We've had a few changes in the city in our finance department. So when we originally prepared that schedule, there was a different finance director and different finance staff. So we're now bringing our new finance staff up to speed. That's caused some changes in the schedule. Also, discussions with agenda scheduling has caused some changes with council agenda dates. So we're fitting in with the council schedule for those dates. So we did have to make some necessary adjustments, but the main goal is to get proposals from construction design build firms in so that they can inform any necessary rate study.
On the Proposition 218 hearing that you listed here for June, and I guess the way it works out would have to be the end of June when you have that hearing. I imagine it's a regular council meeting.
It would be a regular council meeting.
That is the end of the 45-day protest period?
That would be the end of the 45
so the
days.
public knows that it isn't that day. They could get something in that day, but the process starts 45 days prior to that, right?
Right. We'll be going to council in April was we looked at for council authorization to release that Prop 218 notice.
And one other item, it's a little off of the subject here, but something that Mr. Brannon brought up at the beginning, I know it's something elsewhere, but do we officially have a project description to date that includes everything we want to do right now? Something that we can go move forward with an environmental review, everything, financing, what is included in the project to date? What are all the elements?
Yes, we do have a project description. I'm going to ask John to come up and outline that. He's been working with our EIR team on that.
Sure, it's critical to have a project description for the environmental impact report. So we want to make sure that what we've done is convey to the EIR consultant, ESA, everything that you all know about, from the WRF itself, pipelines, lift station, reclamation components, you name it. and then, based on that, had ESA write what their interpretation of what we gave them was, which is to say the project description that will be in the EIR, which they've given to us, and it looks pretty similar to what we gave them. In other words, they have an understanding of what to analyze, and so they're in the midst of doing that. Things will come up, no doubt, through their analysis. Things may come up from the outside through the design process on the pipeline component. That's fine. What we can do is when things raise questions, we can try to adjust the analysis to account for those. But right now, they're moving forward on a project description that's based on all the information that we've provided and gathered from the different consultants.
One of the things is much like what Richard was talking about on the lift station. As I recall, I believe it was in the facilities master plan, they showed 8 different possible locations, but it seems like all the discussion's only been on one. When did we decide that it's only going to be the one?
Mike may chime in here, but I think there's actually 2 sites that were among the, let's call it 8, that were the better sites. We're having the environmental consultants look at those 2 sites in depth, not ignoring the others. But the idea being that came out through the facility master plan process that those are the better locations among those 8. So that helps define that component right there. So obviously there's other components to think about too. We've got an EIR where there's alternatives to look at, so we are considering those kind of optional things, whether it's about lift station location, pipeline location, WRF components, WRF design and layout, access considerations. Those are all things that we're thinking through relative to when impacts are being identified right now in the technical internal stages. So we want to work with a EIR consultant and say, well, what should we do to fix those things before we get too far down the line? So it's pretty iterative right now.
Another part of what I consider to be the total package project description would include, I guess, the injection wells. And as I recall, we were supposed to study that area more to see if that's even possible. Has that been done, or is that to be done with the environmental review process, or how are we going to know that's a viable option of the project?
Well, I'll answer the last part. Yes, that is something we are going to be reviewing through the EIR process. But in terms of the specifics, Mike, about the injection wells, you can add.
So the analysis that was originally done on the injection wells was based on a screening level model developed by GSI Water. A lot of information in that aquifer because of past studies related to MTBE, the presence of the city wells. So then the next step is to determine, is it 3 wells or 4 wells? What's the diameter? The general feasibility at this point has been validated through the modeling work and through, and so now the next step, refining which injection well location. The EIR is proceeding looking at both and saying you could go either places, and so you'll be seeing in probably the February timeline, we'll be bringing back a proposal for hydrogeologic services to go that next step on the pilot testing of the wells and taking through the design of those wells.
And one last question since you're up there.
Sure.
When you're answering the question at the lift station, you made some mention of John having to submit a CDP to the state. Do we need a coastal development from coastal, or do we issue our own?
It's within the city's jurisdiction, the appeals jurisdiction, although coastal could take authority over the project. In my opinion, if we issue the permit, county issues the permit for the water reclamation facility, I believe both those will end up in front of coastal at some point in time through the appeal process.
The reason I ask this is because there's been several meetings, even at the council level, where it says that we need to get a permit from the state. Susan Craig of coastal staff told me directly, no, you do not get a permit from us. We could appeal it, but you issue your own permit, or the county issues the permit.
The county will issue the permit for the South Bay Boulevard site. In my opinion, we would be issuing the permit for the sites that we've selected for the lift station.
Okay.
And I'll ask John to jump in, but the assumption is we would still want to work closely with coastal in that process and submit that application material, understanding that it's likely going to be appealed. So that's a permitting strategy question. I'll leave that to John.
Right. The permitting strategy right now, as it stands, is you've got part of the project in the county, part of the project in the city. So we're working with the county specifically on the WRF side of things because that will be easier from a timing standpoint to get a county permit than to try to work it through with the city's general plan, LCP update, and so forth. The county agrees with that. City staff agrees with that. LAFCO agrees with that. Coastal's on board with that. The city components would be city permitted. Now, as Rob alludes to, it's also possible, if Coastal's amenable to it, to take over permitting authority for the whole thing on the assumption that it would be appealed to them. Right now, that's not where they want to go. That's not where the staff is assuming it's going. But that is something we can explore more and see if they're willing to take on that task. Right now, that's not the strategy, but that is a possibility.
Just one more thing. Okay, to be clear, we're going to be taking about 1 million gallons of sewage, we're going to be pumping it to South Bay Boulevard, then we're going to be pumping effluent right back into our outfall, right? How are we going to mitigate the greenhouse gas issue with the energy cost of pumping those two things?
Well, it's a good question, and the mitigation strategies are going to come out through the EIR. I don't want to speculate on the mitigation at this point.
Thank you. Val, do you have any questions, comments? Thank you. I just have one more comment, Rob, on the financial analysis. That's going to be conducted on the rates, the third line item there for the February 2018.
Yes.
That's going to be conducted by our new or current staff. That's not an outside group doing that. Is that correct?
They'll require some assistance from outside, for example, Bartle Wells and Associates, who did the rate study. They'll be gathering that information, but our finance department will be the authors of that study with assistance from the outside world.
Okay, because Jennifer said at the beginning of the meeting they're firming up some numbers and the balances. So in terms of that second bullet, rate increase recommendations, we still have 2 remaining years of our 5-year rate. Would it be safe to say it may be premature to be even talking about this rate increase, or is that being driven by the loan application?
Those are being driven by the loan application because to receive a loan, SRF, a WIFIA, or even bonds, you need to show that you can pay back that loan with the rates. So to achieve with any lender, whether it's a wastewater treatment plant or a car or your house, they want to show that you can retire that debt and that you have that income to retire that debt.
No stated income allowed.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. I just want to clarify that. Okay. Ann, questions, comments? Thank you. Okay. Any other questions or comments, I think, on item B2? All right. Well, then, thank you for that report. And we will move on to item B3, overview of design build RFP development process. It's in your agenda packet, and I believe we have a presentation. I would like to go through the presentation before I open it for public comment.
Sure. And I'm just going to turn this right over to Mike, who's going to walk us through this presentation on this.
Thank you, Mike. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rob. So this staff report item is an overview of the design build RFP process. So some objectives of the presentation today is we'd like to review the overall procurement process with WRFCAC, review an outline of the RFP, discuss the project description for the RFP, and then review the general project requirements. So the overall procurement process is design build for the water reclamation facility for all the improvements at the South Bay Boulevard site, and then design bid build for the lift station and pipelines. And we followed best practices from the Design Build Institute of America for the procurement process for the design build. It's all been completely vetted with input from the city attorney, and it was presented to City Council on August 8th, 2017. The procurement process is a two-step process, and that's stipulated in the State Public Contracts Code. The request for qualification, which is the first step in that process, was released on October the 27th. Statements of qualification are due on the 7th, so Thursday, and there'll be a short list of no more than 4 consultant teams selected. The next step after that shortlisting process is to prepare and advertise the request for proposals for the design-build procurement. And we want the proposers to include guaranteed maximum price and also life cycle costs. And part of that, during that proposal process, we'll be coordinating and sponsoring in-person meetings with those proposers to discuss their design concepts and work through as they're working through their proposals. And then the objective is to negotiate a final agreement and a final guaranteed maximum price with the selected proposer at the end of that process. So, font's fairly small, but I won't read every line to you, but basically the SOQ, or the statements of qualifications, will come in this Thursday. Between Thursday and January the 15th, our goal is to review those statements of qualifications with the city selection committee, and then look at conducting interviews the week of the 15th of January. City council approval of the short list and the request for proposal that would be released to those shortlisted teams would be January the 23rd, with an RFP issued thereafter on the 24th. Proposals due at the end of April, and this is to allow them enough time to put good preliminary design information together and good cost information. And then that's followed by a proposal review process that runs April through June, concurrent with the rate study and noticing period for the Prop 218 process. Then EIR certification in June 2018. Not part of this, but obviously related to the overall project and very important. Design-build contract negotiations between June and July, and then we submit a WIFIA application middle of July. And council award is anticipated for August to begin the design activities. So the request for proposal, we look at 3 general sections for this. First section is general information. Another section laying out the RFP procurement process so it's clear to the proposers. And then third are the documentation requirements, what they need to provide to the city. Various attachments will include a performance criteria report, the proposed contract documents that the city would like to use, a price proposal instructions, and then a proposal question form that they'll need to fill out. So, Section 1, the general information, will consist of background information, information on the overall schedule, and then a list of what the city's responsibilities will be on the project. There will be references to the performance criteria report. We'll touch on that in a few minutes. Some discussion about that they have the right to rely on the information provided by the city, and that it will lay out how conflicts between the design-build entity and code requirements and information provided by the city will be rectified. And the city attorney is going to be heavily involved with all that. Section 2, the procurement process itself, will lay out that there will be a pre-proposal conference. There will be a procedure for submitting change requests for the contract documents. So it's important that the design builders know that process. And then how they could lay out alternative technical or project management concepts beyond what's being proposed in the RFP. And so the burden will really be on the proposer to provide more details and justification on why their recommendations are superior than what the city would have in the request for proposal, and that they must be able to meet the performance requirements and guarantee the cost savings over what the city may be requesting in the request for proposal. Proprietary meetings and interview with the city will be part of the proposal evaluation process, or part of their proposal preparation process. and then their technical and price proposal and what will be contained in that. The procurement process section of the RFP will also discuss evaluation criteria. And so some possible criteria that we've listed here could include, and this is going to come back to you in a high level of detail early January, but I want to give you a sense of what the different parts of the RFP look like. Team and city collaboration and integration, so how they propose to work closely with the city. Design, development, and management, so what their design development process will be, how tightly they'll manage it. The schedule and technical proposal itself and the ideas presented therein, and then their life cycle cost proposal. And then the weighting of that is something WRF-CAC will weigh in on, and I'm sure council will weigh in on as well. But this is just to give you an idea of the type of evaluation criteria you will expect to see in the draft. The communication protocol. So in order to make sure there are no bid protests or no legal challenges to the selection, laying out a clear communication protocol for the design build proposers, and then also the protest procedures if they don't like the decision the city ultimately makes. So in terms of the documentation requirements, we'll lay out what the submittal and format requirements need to be. The technical proposal will include, we'll ask for their overall management approach, what project controls and cost tracking methodology they'll use for the construction and design, how they propose to collaborate and integrate with the city. We're going to encourage co-location with the city at the annex initially during the design process to facilitate that interaction and help work through design issues. And then the design development and management, their project sequencing and scheduling, so how they seek performing the work, and then also their proposed design at a preliminary level. So they also will need to provide performance guarantees. So one of the advantages of a design build contract is the same entities designing and constructing. And so we want to be able to have them guarantee that if the water quality coming into the plant, based on the information provided by the city, is within certain parameters, that we have a guaranteed output on what's going to come out. Power consumption and efficiency, going to be very important for life cycle costs, and also greenhouse gas impacts. The consumables per hour, like chemicals, that's very important. And also the equipment availability. So how long should this equipment be online based on cleaning intervals, maintenance intervals, and those issues. The performance criteria report itself looks a little bit like a design report that you would see, not quite to as high a level, but there are a lot of summary tables on the city's expectations for the different parts of the project. And so it'll include the general requirements, some design criteria, treatment process overview, standards and requirements for each treatment process step, and then also to what level does that part of the process need to perform, and what does it need to produce. So the performance criteria will also lay out the preferred location within the South Bay Boulevard site, where we would prefer to be, maintaining a setback from the coastal stream that goes through that site, architecture and landscaping, site work grading and road requirements, demolition and decommissioning of the existing wastewater plant, what the expectations will be there, electrical and HVAC, including backup power and electrical service during construction, and then the treatment process and mechanical equipment requirements. So some of the general requirements would be meet all requirements as an integrated and whole facility, deliver what the city needs from when the wastewater comes into the head of the plant through the output to the injection well and recycled water system. Provide guarantees as specified for the entire facility overall. Some other requirements is we want to minimize the confined spaces in the design so it's easy for the operators and less expensive for the operators to maintain those facilities in the future. minimize intermediate pumping to lower life cycle cost, and reduce opportunities for mechanical failures. Consider the selection of the construction materials to maximize the life cycle benefit. Go with construction materials that will give the city the best bang for their buck. Include corrosion control as a main criterion in the detailed design, knowing that we're in a coastal environment. And then incorporate the PG&E Savings by Design program into the design and maximize its incentives. So that's a program that will let you pick higher efficiency motors that use less power, and you can get a rebate towards the design costs for doing that, or towards the construction in some cases. So we want to include that as a consideration in the design builder's efforts. So the design criteria will consist of the raw wastewater flows and loadings. The studies that inform that would be the facility master plan, also confirmation through the work being conducted in the One Water plan, specifying a minimum production for recycled water. So based on the influent coming into the plant, a minimum of that, it should be a minimum percentage should be recycled water. And so the injection wells, groundwater recharge requirements must follow the indirect potable reuse standards in state code. Those are very, very prescriptive. Once you get past the regular kind of secondary treatment filtration processes, it dictates reverse osmosis and advanced oxidation, certain the chemical feed, and so it's very we follow that. They have to follow that requirement. When flows exceed the injection capacity, so those flows would go to the outfall, and tertiary treated effluent, and it'd have to follow the water quality requirements from the city's tentative order that they have now. So, and again, those are for the peak wet weather events. And if the flow is too high to be entirely equalized to go through the RO system, then there's going to be an economic balance between what's the most cost-effective volume to treat for injection. In terms of the treatment process overview, and so the basis for the performance criteria will be screening, and then grit removal, equalization to handle wet weather flows, and that's a storage tank. We're going to base this around a membrane bioreactor facility, but alternatives could include other types of secondary treatment with membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, ultraviolet disinfection, and advanced oxidation. Those are just groundwater recharge requirements. So, we also expect to see tight odor control at the screening and grit removal parts of the plant, because those are tend to be the smelliest locations, if you will, in the plant. But we're following the recommendations from the peer review on the other parts of the plant. The operations and administration facilities. So currently they're scaled down from what was originally evaluated as the Public Works Corporation yard in the facilities master plan based on council direction. So we're looking at the utilities division only now and the personnel associated with the operation of the facility. So it includes an operations building, a maintenance building and shop, vehicle parking, and covered storage for the water and wastewater operators. We're going to have proposed allowances in the RFP, and so in order to accelerate receiving proposals prior to going out with the rate study, getting ahead of the EIR process, we need to include some allowance in there so that the design builders know that if mitigation measures pop up in the EIR that couldn't be predicted or anticipated, that there's a budget there to pull from, so they don't take the full responsibility for proposing on things they can't possibly anticipate. So it's a method of risk allocation to keep the bid, basically the proposal price is lower for the city, those design builders know, hey, if we hit something unforeseen in the EIR, the city's going to negotiate a budget with us to deal with that, as opposed to them having to be able to address every and all foreseeable thing that could come up in the permitting process. Another one is cost escalation due to awarding a contract relatively early, prior to a funding award. So we're going to go out with these RFPs in January. We'll get proposals in April. We'll be evaluating them before we submit the applications, before we complete the applications for WIFIA and State Revolving Loan Fund. Those processes take 8 to 9 months. We do not want to be, you cannot start paying for construction under those loan programs and get reimbursed until after you have those loans in hand. You can start your design phase activities because you have a design and planning loan from SRF. So it's likely going to be a 2-step notice to proceed process. We will give some kind of initial notice to proceed for design, followed up with a second notice to proceed for construction. You got to have a methodology in there to handle cost escalation, and so that the design builders know that they're not entirely on the hook for everything that could happen with oil and gas prices or other sort of unpredictable things over that period. So we're working with the city attorney on all this language, but I just want to give you a sense of what's coming. The proposed review schedule would be come back to WRFCAC in January 4th to provide a draft of the RFP itself. We'd like to have a special WRFCAC meeting January 12th to get your comments, your initial comments at least. I recognize that's a short turnaround time, but given it's in order to accelerate the schedule, it's very important to get your input. But it's going to require some pretty short review periods, particularly for city staff over the holidays and that sort of thing. Council schedule is we're looking at a special city council study section for January 16th, specifically for the RFP. And then the 23rd would be the city council review of the short list and approval for the RFP release. So that would give, basically between the 4th and the 23rd, we would need to get comments, whatever we can back from WRFCAC. Hopefully at that meeting on the 12th, then there's a special study session on the 16th. But that's the review process to get all the inputs all the input we can and all the direction we can to finalize that.
Mike, if I might.
Yes.
Jeannie and I were just conferring over here. I believe we have tentatively picked the 11th, not Friday the 12th.
Thank you.
For the WRFCAC meeting, so Thursday.
It was two consecutive Thursdays in January.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. And we'll make sure we correct that in the version we send to post.
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, wow. Okay. Basically, 2 quick questions on it. The first one was under the treatment process overview. And the question I had is, you're looking at an MBR for the actual treatment. So I assume SBRs are off the table altogether at this point.
No, it can be submitted as an alternate. What we wanted to do with the performance criteria is develop performance criteria around a process, and then the proposers can propose. Part of the alternative treatment concept discussion in the RFP is what information they need to provide us to assure we're getting a similar level of quality. That could still be submitted.
Okay, and then it said under alternatives, activated sludge or equivalent with membrane filtration. Would the membrane filtration be the actual RO unit, or would it be a separate membrane filtration before the reverse osmosis?
Be before the reverse osmosis.
Oh, okay. Okie doke. And the second question is, as you went through it, I can't help but feel this sounds like a negotiated contract as opposed to a competitive bid. Is the lowest bidder going to win the job? Because that's important to the contractors that come in and bid these kind of projects, and I think it needs to be stated clearly that, you don't negotiate it out based on other reasons. Is it truly competitive bid, or is it going to be a negotiated contract?
So it is part of what those meetings really aren't for them to negotiate.
Oh, okay.
They're proposed. It's to present proposed design concepts to the city and get input.
Oh, okay.
So it's not an attempt to negotiate where their GMP is going to be.
Oh.
It's really specifically to talk about design concepts.
Just making sure they covered their bases.
Make sure they cover their bases. Then they submit the actual GMP. Now, part of what will happen is the city will pick the top ranked from those review criteria, and then they will negotiate the final GMP with that one proposer.
Okay.
And that is to catch anything that might come up that
Sure.
you realize it needs to be added in, or just similar,
Yeah, you might have to throw out a bid. I follow that part of it, but I just want to make sure that in the proposers' minds, that it is truly based on coming in with the best cost for the best product.
It's coming in with those
Best cost
those
and the best
evaluation
product,
criteria.
yeah.
That's
Exactly.
right. And we weight that wherever we provide you our recommendations, but we weight that wherever wherever City Council directs us to weight it.
Oh, okay. That's all for me.
Thank you, Steve. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know if you addressed this, but it seems to me that your request for proposal should tell them that the city already has a contract with the pipelines and lift station consultant, that they need to coordinate with them, so that things line up right.
Yep, exactly.
I've seen that problem before. The other thing is that when you put out the RFP, and I've seen this many times too in my experience, is that they resubmit again their damn qualification statements. You already get boxes and boxes, and then guess what? They submit the qualification statements again. So you may in the RFP to say, please, we already know your qualifications, don't resubmit.
That's a good comment. One of the comments we've heard on other procurements is they also hate submitting that stuff twice or getting asked the same question a different way. So we're going to be sensitive to that. Also because of the time frame, everybody's got to move fast. That's a good comment, though. Thank you.
Val? So I have a question. It's a little bit of a follow-up. I do see the life cycle cost proposal weighted at 30%. So is this pretty much standard weighting? Obviously, that'll include the maximum price. But
we would see that as you can weight these wherever you'd like to weight them. The state law says life cycle cost. We'll double check, but I believe the life cycle cost has to be one of the components that you evaluate.
So if the subcommittee or some recommendation comes back otherwise, you would certainly consider that, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And what we'll have to do, too, just so you know, is we're going to work closely with the city attorney through that process, as you can imagine. So.
Okay. And then when you go out with these RFPs, you would also include the template with your city standard terms and conditions so that those can be pre-agreed, by any responsive bidder?
It's a little different than our city standard one. We're developing a contract specifically for design build with our city attorney.
Okay, but that would go out with
will go out with
so that you're not trying to negotiate those after you've supposedly selected the number one bidder.
Correct. What we'll do too is we're going to ask for their comments on those so that we don't get in a situation where it is
as I just described. Okay.
Yep.
Typical. Okay, thank you. That's Mike. Ann? Richard?
Yeah, on referencing the design criteria,
sure.
And so I'm clear, you've already picked a contractor to design the lift station in Force Main. Has this contractor built lift stations and force mains on the coast of California?
Well, we haven't picked a contractor. We've just picked a design consultant at this point.
Okay.
So what'll happen when
has this design consultant designed on the coast of California?
Yes.
He has?
Yes.
And in your parameters for that, have you contacted some of the parameters that are going to be required by the Coastal Commission with regards to that? For instance, leak detection systems and stuff?
Are you talking about the lift station now?
I'm talking about the lift station in Force Main.
Lift station in Force Main. Yes, in fact, part of their scope of work is to give us recommendations on those efforts. The coordination for coastal, for city and county and coastal commission, John will be leading that effort on behalf of our team and providing that input back to them. They also are involved they're also coordinating with the EIR team to get input on that, because that will also be, they're going to get input from a number of locations into that design.
Okay, so to be clear, because Coastal Commission has historically required a leak detection system on the force main, and I would like to know for sure that is, because that would be a parameter that Coastal required previously on lift station designs and force mains on the coast.
And I'm sure we'll see that come up during during our contact with them, and also when they comment on the draft EIR.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments from staff? I'd like to open it. Thank you, Mike. I'd like to open it up to public comment, please. Please come forward.
Thank you, Barry Brannon, Morro Bay. This goes back to the fact, I just did a little calculation. There's only 2 of us in our household, but if you divide 130 million by 10,000 people, looks like I'm going to buy about a $26,000 car. That's what I would use the $26,000 run a treatment plant. But I think we need a treatment plant. My point is, before I buy a car, I look at it, I go compare it and see what I got. With all what we're doing so far, we don't have an EIR. We're asking the contractors to bid on something. We don't even have an EIR. We also don't have a plan. The plan that we've shown what we're going to build is much different than what people are talking about. So I'd like to see at least a picture, a plot plan of what this plant should look like and what we're asking the contractors to do. And I can't imagine that the contractors have any idea of what to bid on if you don't have an EIR done. You say, well, we're going to get the contractors all lined up, and then when we get the EIR, we're going to sit down with him and we're going to negotiate. I'm sorry, that is going to be, you're so vulnerable to be able to try to go to the contractor after he's bidded and say, well, here's our EIR, and now you bid on this, but this is what we want, and so how are we going to get together? That's not competitive bidding. That's a totally negotiated contract, and you've got the cart before the horse.
Thank you, Barry. Any other public comment, please?
Tina Metzger, Morro Bay. I agree with the previous speaker. Looking at your timeline, program schedule update, we were told in August of 2016 at the scoping hearing that we would have a draft EIR in September 2017. Why are we 6 months behind on this? You're assuming during the public comment period that some unknown issue won't come up, everything will go smooth. That doesn't happen very often. You're assuming that there won't be a requirement for a supplemental EIR. Your timeline is going to blow up in your face. So I'd like to know why we're 6 months behind on the publication of the draft EIR. I'd like to know what Plan B is if this timeline blows up in your face. I'd like to know if we don't make the WIFA deadline because we don't have a certified final EIR. What are your plans? What's the city's plans? So if my questions could be answered, I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Tina? Any other public comment? Closed public comment period. Any response from staff to Barry or Tina's?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think there might be some confusion about the process for design build. We have to develop performance criteria, which will include what we expect to see out of construction of the facility, including a draft plot plan will be included in that. So that'll be moving forward before we go out to RFP with this project. So the contractors will know what they're bidding on. What they may not know is if any unknown mitigation measures come out of the EIR. That's why we're proposing an allowance for those so that they can have a bid for that. Why are we 6 months behind? We have taken council-directed pauses along this project to look at a variety of alternatives and a variety of sites. So that has caused us to delay this project. With the WIFIA loan through EPA, that is a federal process. It does not require a certified EIR. We propose that we will have one done by then, but EPA will be the lead agency on the environmental document. They'll be preparing a NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act document. They'll be using much of that information from that EIR in the presentation. Plan B. Plan B is not to go to Plan B. It's to have our EIR consultant, who we expect is to be able to address all of the issues. If things blow up and we don't meet the WIFIA funding timelines, that reduces the amount of subsidized funding that can be brought into this project. What happens is costs go up due to the cost of money. So that, unfortunately, is probably Plan B, is costs increase. I'll let John and Mike add anything that I might have missed, like the actual name of NEPA.
I'm not going to tackle the NEPA question, but I will regarding the South Bay Boulevard site. So the comments are a really good one. Why would you go out with an RFP before the EIR is complete? One of the advantages we've had is we've done full cultural resource studies, full bio studies at the South Bay Boulevard site. We've done a geotech, what they call a geotech baseline report. That's kind of like a design report for a design build project at the site. We've done borings. We know a lot about that site. There's a lot we know what the standard requirements are on the county's LCP and the city's LCP, and so there's a lot we can build in there and a lot we can predict in terms of mitigation that we'll include in the project, but we need to have some allowance there in case some surprise came out of the EIR process. With the outreach to the agencies that we're conducting, we don't anticipate huge surprises, but that's the point of the allowance, is because things come up you don't anticipate and can't anticipate sometimes. But the goal is work everything in there, every consideration we can in there for the design builders to try to keep their costs on a level playing field and also give them as much information they can to put together good proposals.
So have you figured out those risk allocation percentages? Is it 50-50 or is it going to vary depending on the factor?
So the way the risk allocation would work would be, it depends. So in the case of the environmental mitigation, what we do is we define what mitigation measures we expect to see. Design builder can propose on that, and then we establish a budget and say if things come up that we don't anticipate, then you're going to get a budget out of this amount. If you don't, when their risk goes up, their bids go up, and that's how they account for it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions for Mike, please?
Yeah, actually, since Mike brought it up, or someone brought it up about the NEPA, as I recall when we were going to do this, that John said we were going to do a combined CEQA NEPA document. So are we now not having John do that part of it, and the EPA is going to do it instead, or are we going to do one anyway, and they'll accept what we've done? I don't want to double task the NEPA aspect of the environmental review.
Yeah. John, you'll take that.
Good question.
Great question. First of all, Rob, it's National Environmental Policy Act, for the record. But yeah, when we first envisioned this, the idea was we anticipated there'd be federal funding from some source. So the way we scoped it was to say, let's make sure the CEQA document could handle NEPA. Every federal agency does NEPA differently. And some of them like combined documents. Some of them, like EPA, like to do their own NEPA. So in this case, we've worked with EPA. What do you want? How do you want to do this? And they said, well, we'd like to do our own NEPA. We'd like you to have a CEQA document that allows us to do that, and we'd like your help any way you can help us put that together. So that's how that is going. Now, other agencies, if there was money coming from other federal sources, we'd want to make sure the documents handle that. So that's the way we're doing it. What they need from us is a CEQA document that's pretty ripe to be able to, for them to do NEPA so the loan timing works. There was another question I wanted to answer that wasn't addressed about supplemental EIRs. Mm-hmm. And what if something comes out through this process that isn't covered in the EIR project description? Well, first of all, it's useful to know that our anticipated time for the draft EIR coming out is March. The submittal of the proposals is likely April. There will be the benefit of knowing some of a good piece of the mitigation strategy for them by then, but it's possible things may change to the final EIR. It's also possible through the design process, a design comes forward that's a little different than what the EIR anticipated. That shouldn't affect the loan process. We'll have an EIR out, but if we need to be able to adjust the EIR through a supplement at the back end of that to address whatever those changes are, we could do that. The key is that we need to get an EIR ripe enough to let EPA do their own NEPA.
Will then EPA have either a finding of no significant impact or an EIS at the end of their review?
We talked about that with them. They really are going to defer. They're not normally in the business of doing environmental documents. They're really going to defer to what the findings of the EIR are likely to be to frame their own NEPA document. That's also possible in there that, let's say it was a combined document and it had unmitigable impacts. Doesn't mean you can't deal with a NEPA through that. In fact, what they would anticipate is possibly, I'm not going to speculate how they want to do it, an EA with a finding of no significant impact. Their issues are not necessarily the same as CEQA issues, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But what they said conceptually was they feel they could wrap up their own NEPA document within the time frame of what we need to have happen for the WIFIA loan. Even when we submit that loan, it may be that they conduct their NEPA documentation even after our application is submitted. They said there's a little bit of leeway for them. That's their process. As long as they know that we've given them the documents they need for them to complete that along with our application.
Separate from the Coastal Commission, I know that the EPA has a concern about building facilities in a floodplain. It's separate than what coastal staff concerns might be. This is federal. And the lift station will definitely be built in that hazard zone. Is that going to be a problem with them in the review?
You're talking about EPA or coastal?
EPA and the WIFIA loan aspect.
Yeah. I don't anticipate that's going to be a major issue beyond that it's an issue. The fact that if Coastal Commission can get, the Coastal is going to provide comment on the draft EIR. They're going to provide whatever adjustments to mitigation they think are needed. The EIR consultant, city staff, county, and others, the public will all have their say too. By the time it gets to EPA, that issue will be pretty well vetted out. EPA's take to us at the staff level, Kevin McDonald more or less gives the documents. We're going to basically use them and to a large extent rely on your technical expertise in allowing them to process the loan documents. They're not really in the business of doing environmental work. They really farm that out or do it based on the technical expertise of others. So we are going to be working with them even as we get the draft EIR out to say, here's what we're finding. Tell us if we're going down a path that you need other information for you to complete your own document. I don't see that as a problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I got a question for you, John. Okay, so the money that comes from the EPA, I'm just trying to follow the money. So it comes from the federal government. Does it go into Cal EPA and from Cal EPA down, or does it go straight from the feds?
I'll let Mike answer that question. That would be better.
I can answer that. It comes straight from EPA to the city, and it's a reimbursement type agreement, so we have to actually expend the money to draw on that.
So you basically bypass Cal EPA on that, right?
Cal EPA is not involved in the WIFIA process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, so on this item, you would like us to identify 2 members to assist in the review of the SOQ, the Statement of Qualifications.
We can do up to 3 members if there's a desire for 3 members on the committee. We just can't have a majority of the quorum.
And along those lines, when will that work? I was trying to follow, just to be clear, when would that work begin? Because it looks like you're talking about some work over the holiday season as well.
Maybe Mike can walk us through that, the detail of the what we're expecting.
So that job would start Thursday, basically, when the SOQs come in. Now, what we can do is, it will require attendance for likely a full day for the interviews. Sometime in that January 15th time frame. It'll require review of the statements of qualifications. We'll work with the committee to schedule a time to get together sometime before that. We'll try to limit the number of in-person meetings if we can over the holidays and try to be respectful of your time. And then it would pick back up once the proposals come in. At the end of that the end of April, to help review those proposals. So there'll be a little bit of a gap in there.
Okay, thank you. And what specific expertise? I mean, I think I know the obvious. You want the engineering background. How much of this will be finance related? Looks to me like a lot more engineering, procurement.
Yeah, I would say the finance piece of this is likely going to be with the submittals that come in with the SOQs. It will be city finance department and legal looking at and making sure that they've got their insurance coverages and everything they need. Mm-hmm. There will obviously be environmental components and engineering components.
Okay,
I think more importantly. Community representation is really the goal. Is
okay. And some of this would come back to WRFCAC anyways too. Wouldn't be just limited to the subcommittee. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's correct. Ultimately, the final recommendations for the proposal selection and the final GMP that comes back to the city and the short list, that all would come to WRFCAC and council. Or to WRFCAC, sorry. Okay. So we can discuss or ask for volunteers. My suggestion would be we have somebody from the engineering committee and the environmental committee minimally.
I'd be glad to do it. I'm available in that time period, so it shouldn't be a problem for me.
Stephen?
The only thing I'd ask real quick, you brought up the end of April also into the mix. I'm going to be gone the whole month of April. I'll be out of country. Is that a problem for what you're trying to do?
Probably not.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead.
Okay. So Steve, Paul, I would like to help with the finance, but I have limited availability. I would prefer that be at the end, and if your finance department needs any help. Val? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so raise your hand if I've missed you. I've looked at you, and I'm not sure the response I'm getting back. We have 2 volunteers, and then we have a couple people. Oh, would you like to? Okay. I know you've participated in this before. All right, so I think we have 3 volunteers, and then the rest of us can give input as appropriate. Is that fair? Okay. And the 2 that aren't here, I guess they're going to miss out on this opportunity, so. Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll make a move that Steve Shively, Paul Donnelly, and Val Levelette be assigned to the subcommittee to review the RFPs. Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so you have that, Rob? Thank you. And then I think the only thing left is you said you'd correct, we will have a meeting on January 4th, and that's a Thursday, the first week?
That's a Thursday to avoid coming
A day after the holiday.
Day after the holiday, and expecting our crews to be able to set up the room and the day ahead of time. So.
Oh, okay. I thought it was so that we're prepared, but thank you.
That also.
Okay. And then the special meeting would be the following Thursday, January 11th.
January 11th, yes.
So we'll get that. Okay. Are there any closing comments from our committee? All right. Then I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 4:50 p.m. with that going over to 5, and thank all the public for your participation and attendance. Thank you, and staff as well.